Chapter 26, The Breaking Point. The air around them was thick with tension as Elowen stormed out of the small grove, her footsteps quick and furious. The world outside the Archfae's domain felt too close, too suffocating. She had to get away, she had to think. But even as the ancient trees of the grove closed in behind her, a gnawing despair twisted in her chest. Selene was willing to die for this, to give her life away, and Elowen couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop her. She heard footsteps behind her, slow at first, hesitant. "Princess," Lyra's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle yet unyielding. "You can't do this alone." "I don't want to do it at all." Elowen's voice cracked, barely above a whisper, but the words were sharp. "I don't want her to die for me. I don't want to become a monster. I don't want to wear the chains." Selene's voice was soft but firm as she followed close behind, her steps light despite the tension. "I won't die. I'll always be with you. You'll never be alone." "You don't know that," Elowen snapped, spinning to face her. But Selene didn't flinch, didn't step back. "I do know it," she replied, resolute, "and I will always be by your side, even if the chains become real." "That's what I'm afraid of," Elowen whispered, almost to herself. Lyra, who had been silently watching, finally spoke, her voice cool but insistent. "We will find another way," she said, the words carrying a weight that made Elowen pause. "But we must try before we give up." Elowen slammed her fist into the trunk of a nearby tree, feeling the rough bark scrape against her skin as her teeth ground together. "There is no other way," she hissed. "I can feel it. The darkness is inside me. The god is inside me. I can't—" The air shifted, a sudden coldness washed over her, and before she could react, shadowy tendrils erupted from her body, writhing like serpents from the depths of a nightmare. Her limbs jerked, her body no longer under her own control. The mark on her forehead, the seal she had carried her whole life, began to pulse, its presence burning. Her heart pounded as the darkness inside her clawed its way out, suffocating her. The chains pulled, and she could feel it, pulling her toward the very depths of that evil god. "No," Elowen gasped, but it was too late. With a roar, the shadowy tendrils spiraled out, and in the next moment, she was no longer Elowen. She was something else, something darker. Her eyes turned a deep, void-like black, the world warping around her as her form became ethereal, a shadow in the moonlight, moving without shape, without reason. The tendrils lashed out toward Lyra, Selene, and Sir Aldrich, those closest to her striking with savage fury. "Stay away from me!" Elowen's voice was nothing like her own. It was distorted, a whisper lost in the darkness. Sir Aldrich moved first. His sword flashed in the moonlight, cutting through the air with precision. He swung low, trying to sever the tendrils as they writhed toward him, but each strike only sliced the shadows into fragments, which quickly reformed into more tendrils, more darkness. "Get back!" he shouted, spinning into a defensive stance. His blade danced in the air as he used his swordsmanship to cut down the spiraling shadowy mass that grew larger by the second. Selene darted forward with quick, precise movements, her daggers flashing as she slashed at the tendrils that reached for her. She moved like a shadow herself, her form fluid and silent, evading each strike before returning a counterattack. Each slash from her daggers sliced through the darkness, but the shadows twisted and reformed, more insistent than before. "You're not going to stop me?" Elowen's voice echoed in the chaos, filled with a cruel mockery of herself. But then, Lyra's voice rang out across the battlefield, sharp and commanding in Elvish. "Stop! Lower your weapons!" The words held power, a commandment, and the archers of the elven order that had been ready to take aim paused, their bows still in the air. The air crackled with Lyra's magic, an invisible barrier of authority. "You do not attack her, do not harm her, or I will bring you down myself." Lyra's tone was low, but the magic in her voice was unmistakable. The archers hesitated, their eyes darting between the princess and the elf. For a moment they lowered their bows, the unspoken power of Lyra's command reaching them. Elowen twisted in the darkness of her own form, the shadows shaping into claws as they slashed out at her friends and guardians. But Lyra reacted in an instant. She raised her hands, tendrils of magic spiraling from her fingertips, weaving into a protective barrier around herself and Selene. The shadowy tendrils struck against her shield, the impact shuddering through her body as her magic crackled in the air. "This is not you, Elowen!" Lyra shouted, her voice reaching through the tumult. You are not this! Fight it! A scream, a primal, heart-wrenching sound, echoed in Elowyn's mind, shaking her very core. The darkness pulled, and she was forced to wrench against it. She breathed heavily, feeling her will slipping. The god's voice, like a cold whisper, urged her forward, promising her power, promising her the end of the pain, the seal. But Elowyn, in the depths of the chaos, focused, her mind fighting against the rising darkness. She couldn't lose herself. She had to find her way back. "Stop! Stop!" she cried out, her voice cracking. I don't want this." Sir Aldrich lowered his sword, watching the princess with concern in his eyes. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. Lyra's voice, soft but commanding, reached her again. "You can do this, Elowyn. The chains are strong, but you are stronger. You can break them." The tendrils paused, as if uncertain, the shadowy form of Elowyn hovering in mid-air, her body flickering. Her eyes flashed with a spark of recognition, and for a brief moment Elowyn's human face reappeared. She gasped. With a roar, she fought against the dark, summoning the strength to resist, to stand against the will of the god inside her. The darkness quivered, hesitated, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Elowyn pulled herself free.